To succeed in radio and to ensure you stand out amongst all of the other radio personalities and content creators, it's important that you don't become saturated or complacent with your success, always wanting to move the needle of progression and innovation forward. Having the courage to create creative content is something that Joe Pardavila knows all about. He's produced over 10,000 hours of content during his career in terrestrial radio and podcasting. Joe was a radio personality and contributed and produced content for the legendary New York radio station 95.5 PLJ, where he was also a part of Scott and Todd in the morning. He also has a background in sketch comedy, writing, and some innovative thoughts on the state of the entertainment industry today and where it's headed into the future. And he joined me this week to tell me more. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. Joe, if you're ready, I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program. And I'm super excited to talk to you this morning all about your experience in entertainment, buddy. Great to see you. And happy Wednesday, my friend.
Oh, thank you. Happy Wednesday to you, too.
So, Joe, yeah, you're welcome. And I'm curious to begin our conversation, Joe, by asking you just to give me sort of a 360-degree view of who you are and why you're so fabulous, because I know you spent over 25 years in radio and you've produced over 10,000 pieces of audio content, my friend. So tell me, what's been your secret to success?
Well, I don't know about fabulous, Kevin. I'm an immigrant's kid, so I've always had the attitude of like, you got to outwork and out hustle the person next to you. So my career is basically very accidental. Growing up, Kev, I always wanted to be in show business, but I really didn't have any connections or knew anyone or knew what to do. I grew up in the suburbs of New York City, right in New Jersey. And I decided to sign up for an internship when I was in college. And the only reason I took the internship, Kev, was because of the fact that the radio station was located right near a transit hub in New York. So I wouldn't have to take like 2 or 3 trains to get to work or anything like that. So I took this internship that was located right above Penn Station at Madison Square Garden, New York City. The radio station was WPLJ Radio, world famous station, was there for over 40 years. And I spent over 20 years there, Kevin, like you mentioned, working there. And it turned out that internship led to me being there for my entire adult life. So I started as an intern there and ended up being part of the morning show, executive producer over the last couple of decades there. And it was quite a ride.
Yeah, absolutely. And Joe, just tell me how rare and lucky you are to have been in one place for so long, because I know in media that's not often the case. So tell me how rare that is and how fortunate you personally were.
Oh, absolutely. I chalk up a lot of it to luck and good timing. So the morning show I was a part of, Kevin, was hosted by 2 legendary air personalities in New York. One is Scott Shannon, who some people who are kind of fans of radio may know the name. He's the guy who invented Z100, which is the sort of like iconic top 40 radio station in the United States, based in New York City. And the other was Todd Pettengill, who's known for being a host on WWE and WWF. And so when I started, I was 20 years old. When I first started getting paid on the morning show, I was 20, and the morning show had been together for about 5 or 6 years, and they were sort of like rising. They had taken the station from sort of like, a middle of the pack to a top tier radio station. And those two guys stuck together for 20 years, and I sort of grew with them. I started as a phone operator. I was someone who just did errands and stuff, and slowly but surely developed my personality, developed my skills, and stuck along for the ride until they broke up in the mid 2000s. And then I stuck with one of the hosts, Todd, there, and up until the end when the radio station was blown up.
Yeah, and I'm also curious to ask you, Joe, about the importance of having to reinvent yourself in media today, because, a lot of the time you don't stay in one position for so long. So whether it be in radio, acting, or television, tell me about the importance of always being cognizant of the need to reinvent yourself. I'm curious to get your answers there.
Yeah, and I think, Kevin, the key part of reinvention is having sort of the foresight and sort of the look to the future. Because towards the end of my time working in terrestrial radio, and this, Kevin, is the fact that radio is sort of a bit of has sort of had this air of being a dying medium. It's still listened to by millions and millions of people, but you saw it more on the downswing as opposed to being on the upswing. So over the last few years there, I noticed that podcasting was going to be sort of the next sort of phase of radio. And then I started just working on doing a podcast on the side. And that's sort of what introduced me to the world of podcasting and how I sort of cut my teeth doing that while I was doing the terrestrial. And then when the terrestrial gig ended, I went full time into podcasting. I was hired by a company in Charleston, South Carolina that publishes books for authors, but started a new podcast division. And they hired me to be sort of the person to spearhead the effort and be there to consult and coach people into doing podcasts.
Absolutely. And just building on that, Joe, I'm curious to ask you, what do you think makes a great podcast? Because, there are millions of people that are producing podcasts these days, and it's really become an exploding medium. But I'm curious to ask you, what do you think makes a great podcast?
Well, I mean, I think first and foremost, a great podcast is a podcast that is done at a professional level. I think anyone could do a podcasting. I'm not one of these people, Kevin, who'd be like, there's too many podcasts. Everyone's got a podcast. The old meme, the podcast is the lower back tattoo of the 90s. Everyone's got one. So I'm not one of those people. I'm all for, like, if you want to do a podcast, go for it. But I will say the ones that you use the term great, the ones that are great, the ones that rise above are the ones that really treat it as a profession. A lot of people do podcasts. Of those millions, a lot of them, and I don't want to throw out a number, but a lot of them are either side hustles or something that people do as a hobby. The folks that do it and take it to a professional level where it's like they work on it hours and hours per day on it. They invest a lot of time and energy. Those are what make great podcasts. You can't just make a podcast by turning on a mic and talking into it. A great podcast is developing concepts, connecting with an audience, doing all the things that traditional media would do, but doing it in the podcast space. That is what makes a great podcast. Folks that come at it from a professional point of view.
And having great conversations, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Conversations are a big part of podcasts. As you know, Kev, podcasting is like many other mediums. You have subgenres. So you've got the true crime stuff. You've got the narrative stuff. You also have the conversational podcasts, the ones I enjoy listening to. So, and that's sort of like how I came to write the book, Good Listen, is that I noticed that a lot of people were having trouble or probably lost the ability to have great conversations. So I wrote it to not only for the next generation of podcasters, but folks who don't even want to do a podcast, but just want tips on how to communicate better with other people. It's become a bit of a lost art because of all the technology. And again, I'm not one of these people like, there's too much technology, these kids and their phones. I love a good text as the next person. But I think because of all that, it's created what they call a digital amnesia, where you've forgotten a lot of things. And one of the things that we've forgotten is how to communicate with other people.
Yeah, I think if you're a good podcaster, it can also benefit you in other aspects of your life, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, podcasting is all about, when you're doing the conversation part of the podcast, it's all about having an open dialogue between two or more people. It's not like one person pontificating or one person not listening to the other person. So that's why I think podcasting is a bit of a microcosm to real world. Kevin, I'm sure you've heard the joke that, one podcast equals 5 first dates, because of the ability to connect with someone in a medium where it's so intimate. There's no distractions. It's only one or two people having this conversation with each other. So it's a really good way to connect with people, and using those skills that the great podcasters or great interviewers have, it can really sort of transcend into the normal, everyday life.
Yeah, absolutely. And Joe, I'm just going to share just a little bit about myself. So I was born with what's called spastic quadriplegic cerebral palsy. Simply means that I don't have enough oxygen in my legs to walk normally. But Joe, I always say that I can either have my circumstances work for me, or I can work for my circumstances. And outside of hosting this podcast, my friend, I help businesses amplify the hiring of folks with disabilities. So when we look at a media perspective, I'm curious, in your opinion, how can we create a more inclusive culture for individuals with disabilities to pursue a career in media?
Well, I will say, Kevin, I think it starts, it's like a grassroots thing. And I think you need folks like yourself to be sort of the groundbreakers and the glass ceiling breakers, to have generations behind you see that, hey, if Kevin can do it, I can do it. So I think the more people that are doing it, that are fighting some sort of challenge, I think then all of a sudden the corporate world will be like, oh, there's more of these candidates. Because the thing is, Kevin, you're the first person that I've had in a podcast or spoke to a podcast that is dealing with this specific challenge. So I think the more people that are outwardly focused and training people and letting know that people like you exist and have something to bring to the table, I think that's where it starts. It's really very much like a grassroots type effort, where the more people that you do it, then it's like everything else. The cream rises to the top.
Yeah, absolutely. And Joe, you've been in the media game for more than a quarter century. So I'm curious, what's the biggest and best professional and personal lesson that you've learned throughout the course of your career?
I would say, Kevin, I mentioned to you that my parents were immigrants. My mother was a Cuban refugee. My father was a sailor from Spain, and they pretty much had to just scratch and claw to build a life for them and their 2 kids. So growing up, my mom was always like, hey, listen, I don't care what you do for a living as long as you're a good person. So since I had that sort of support back home, my big thing was like, I want to have a job that doesn't feel like a job. So the fact that I've been able to spend essentially a majority of my life on this planet Earth working in media, whether it was in terrestrial radio or podcasting, I'm just fortunate I can do it. I mean, I'm not, I don't have delusions of grandeur, Kevin, where I feel like I'm changing the world or anything like that. But I feel like I serve a purpose where either I can be entertaining to folks when I'm front facing and hosting a podcast or a show, but also the skills that I've acquired from doing all this for so many years, I can help people that don't know all these things that I know. And so, yeah, like even like on my day job now, Kevin, I speak to folks, and for years I took for granted the skills that I had sort of honed and acquired in radio, and then started working with novices. I was like, oh, wow, all that stuff that I learned, that's not normal. And so the idea that I have all these things that I can impart to folks who are incredibly successful business owners and CEOs and thought leaders, that I can give them a little piece of me and help them, I think that's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And Joe, when we look at the whole landscape of society today, I'm curious, what role do you think the social justice movement and sort of celebrity influence has had on the societal discourse of today's sort of world there. But I'm curious to get your opinion on the role that celebrities and the entertainment industry has to play when we talk about social justice as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've read somewhere, Kevin, that the loudest people are it's like the tiniest minority. Like there was something like the like only 8% of people on Twitter are really active and either volatile or hostile or anything like that. So it's a small percentage of people that raise their voice and that are heard. So celebrities are one of those people. So in terms of the impact that they have on people and society, I think it's not huge. I honestly think a lot of change happens in masses. So I think when more and more people gather and you see people from outside of a certain culture, for example, like the Black Lives Matter, it's not just black people in those marches. It's white, brown, it's all sorts of people embracing it. So when you have multiple constituents banding together for a cause, I think that's where real change happens. I mean, celebrities on the surface, it's interesting and it's the media, it's easy for them to cover because they could put a name to it and a face. But at the end of the day, when it comes to change, you just need to pull a lot of different minded and different looking people to make that happen. And I think that's where the real impact comes from. I think it comes from the people, not from celebrities.
Yeah, having said that, what do you think is sort of the biggest entertainment headline today that has had the impact on the world from a positive perspective? When you look at the entertainment industry today, what do you think are some positive headlines we can build off of?
I mean, I will say one of them is the fact that you see a giant company like Marvel and Disney, which owns Marvel. You see them not just going with the same old white action hero that we grew up with in the 80s and 90s. You're seeing a diversity. You're seeing the success of the Black Panthers of the world, the Shang-Chi's of the world, even female-led films like Captain Marvel and Black Widow. So when you see major companies like that embracing diversity, and I know that's a loaded term, but it's really more about the fact of just showing different faces and different types of people in the forefront. I'm telling you, people are not old enough to remember this, but movie stars in the 80s were pretty much all white men. There were a couple of random females that broke through that became superstars, but it was mostly white men. And you're seeing such a huge change now all of a sudden where you're seeing more and more people of diverse backgrounds becoming stars, whether it's in film, whether it's in a streaming show or whatnot. So I think that's one of the great things that we're seeing happen. And it could be part of the whole societal shift that we've been going through over the last few years. But obviously, a lot of that stuff takes time. When a movie gets produced, it doesn't just come out of nowhere. It takes years to get in development to get to where people actually get to see it. So you're seeing these slow and incremental changes. And I think that's where the entertainment industry has really stepped up by having more and more of those different looking people become superstars and movie stars and the people that people talk about and want to watch and follow.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Joe, when I look at this industry of podcasting and entertainment and that sort of a realm, I started this podcast almost 2.5 years ago, and I am less than 10 episodes now from 600 episodes. So wow. I'm curious to ask you about the importance of commitment, as we talked about earlier, because, a podcasting can be a hobby, but as you said earlier, it's for those that want to make it a career, that are really successful. So I'm curious to ask you about the importance of the level of commitment when you get into radio or podcasting.
Absolutely, Kevin. One of the first things I tell people when I start working with them, a client or someone just asking me about podcasting, I use the tired old idiom, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So if you want to become successful in this, you need to do it over time. Joe Rogan did not sign a $100 million deal with Spotify because he decided to do 6 or 7 podcasts. He had done 1,000 episodes before he signed that deal with Spotify. So again, say what you will about Joe Rogan. He is objectively, he is a successful podcaster. So if you want to rise to that level or even half of that level, you need to really be into it for the long haul and doing it professionally, consistently. You mentioned, Kevin, about the fact that sometimes people they just don't have the time to put into it. That's why I when I coach folks, it's like, think of your show as seasons. Because if you think of yourself, oh my God, a marathon. So does that mean I got to do 500 episodes before I can monetize this? No, and if you don't have the time to do that, you need to just make your podcast a little more fractional. I tell people, think of your podcast as a TV series. Every TV series has a finite number of episodes per season. It's changed. Back in the day, it used to be 20-something episodes, but now a television series has 8 to 13 episodes. So think of your podcast like that. Just be like, okay, I don't have the time to do a daily podcast for 52 weeks a year. I can't do that. And a lot of people can't. But maybe you think about it like this. I will do 10 podcasts that will come out weekly this fall. Well, that all of a sudden gives you a goal. I'm going to do 10 podcasts. Prepare for these 10 podcasts, make the best 10 podcasts I could do, and then roll with it. If you enjoy the process, okay, season 2, here comes another 10 episodes. So if you can give yourself mile markers, North Stars, something to look forward to that sort of fits your schedule and your life, I think that's the best way to approach a podcast when you're starting. With that in mind, that it's a marathon, not a sprint, that if you want to succeed, you're going to probably have to do it for more than a few months or even a few years to become ultra successful. So I think that those are kind of little tips I give people when they're starting out their pod.
Yeah, absolutely. And Joe, I also know that you have a background in sketch comedy, so I'm wondering if you can share that with me this morning.
Yeah. It's funny, Kevin, when I was working in radio in New York, it was pretty much a 24/7 job. I mean, I was waking up at 3:00 in the morning, going into the city, do a morning show from 6 to 10, and staying there in the afternoon. And it was exhilarating and thrilling, but it was exhausting and didn't really give me time to do anything else. I didn't have much of a social life. Not that I'm like, a social butterfly or anything like that. But as years went on, I was like, man, I really have to commit to doing other things than just this radio thing. So in New York, one of the great things about it is the fact that you could pretty much take a class for anything in person. Like you could probably take an underwater basket weaving class in New York if you wanted to, and you could and learn about a skill that you probably couldn't in most cities, that they just don't have the number of people to teach. So in New York, the sketch and improv scene, as you can imagine, when I signed up, when I started doing it, was pretty jam-packed. Like you had 3 or 4 theaters. I mean, I'm talking about theaters in New York that were having live sketch or improv 7 days a week. This is pre-pandemic. Things have kind of changed. But at the time, you can go, if you want to see an improv or sketch show, you can just go about any time, any part of New York City to go see one live and in person. So I'd always wanted to take sketch. I was a huge fan of Saturday Night Live, loved sketch comedy. And I just, on a whim, I just committed myself to just start taking classes. And I took classes at the Upright Citizens Brigade, famously started by Amy Poehler and several of her friends from Chicago. And I just really fell in love with the craft. I love being on stage because for many years, as you know, when you're in podcasting, you're usually in a sort of isolated room with a microphone. So the idea to perform in front of people and do things like that was exhilarating, and I loved it. And also, one of the byproducts of that, when you learn the sort of the craft of improv and sketches, improv is a great skill to use for radio or podcasting because it really helps you hone your listening skills. The best improvisers in the world are the best listeners. They're not trying to be the funniest people or trying to come up with the funniest line. They're listening to what their partners are saying in a scene. And you take that into the real world, or you take that into podcasting or doing a radio show, it all helps. So I think I learned so much from doing improv and sketch. It helped me in my normal day life, and it helped me become better at interviewing people and doing a radio show because of the skills I was able to work on doing sketch and improv in New York.
Yeah, absolutely. And Joe, in the couple of minutes I have left with you this morning, I'm curious to ask you, when you look at your own individual and personal and professional legacy, how do you want that to be defined?
Hopefully what my mom wanted me to be. Like someone said, he was a good guy. I wanted to be I like to think that I'm a good person. I treat everyone the same. If you listen to my podcast, Kevin, I end it always with, live by the golden rule, treat others as you want to be treated. And that's sort of how I've lived by. And it's a great way to sort of exist in this world, and that you treat everyone the same and that you want to be treated as well. So, yeah, I mean, if that's my legacy, that I was a good guy who happened to have a pretty good career in podcasting and radio, that's pretty cool. I'll sign up for that.
Absolutely. And Joe, finally, if people want to get connected with you, my friend, what's the best way they can do that?
Well, I'm very easy to find on the Google. So if you Google Joe Pardavila, I'm on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn are my three main social media platforms. I have a book out called Good Listen that's available on ebook, paperback, and audiobook on Amazon and wherever you buy books. And yeah, if you ever want to shoot me a note or want to check out my book, those are good places to start.
Fantastic. Well, Joe, as a veteran podcaster myself, I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I want to thank you for the good work that you do to promote this as a medium. I want to congratulate you on such a successful career in radio, and I want to thank you for being here this morning to engage in a conversation. It's most appreciated.
Thank you, Kevin, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk to just a nobody like me. So I appreciate it, man.